Yes, so my name's Ryan Fant. I'm a co-founder of Keen Home. We're a venture-backed startup here in New York that builds hardware devices for the connected home. Just the 15 seconds on what we're basically doing at Keen Home. We're building proactive hardware devices that really focus on the core functions of the home, so we won't be building smart wearables, scales anytime soon. It's really about kind of making your home take care of you. And our first product is a smart home air vent, so vents like you kind of see up here that intelligently open and close to redistribute airflow throughout the home, kind of what nested for thermostats we're hoping to do for the lowly air vent. But I know today kind of the topic was perfecting your product, and one of the things that, although I'm not an engineer, I can kind of play one on TV now. I've learned a lot about how building the best product experience possible has to involve the physical on some level. Whether you're building a product, which is what a lot of this will be about today, but even if you're building a design, an application or an experience through software, at the end of the day, you're interacting with it in the physical world, whether it's a tablet or on the computer, whatever it might be. So a lot of this is going to translate to both worlds. Physical prototypes, there's obviously looks like prototypes, we have works like prototypes, and what I'm going to try to focus on today is really where those two worlds meet. It seems like we're probably past this phase where we're looking at the pros and cons and what you get out of all of these. But an example of a works like prototype is, so I don't know if anyone watches Daily Show, but they ripped on Google Glass past weeks, and this was the works like prototypes that they put together. Which honestly, and I wish I could have put it up, Google, if you just Google Glass prototypes, you'll actually see like 6 versions of it, and it's not so far off from this. It's literally like a Nexus 4 strapped to a pair of Oakleys with all this stuff going on, so they didn't get it so far off. But obviously, you use this to test functionality. Are there too many features? What features are missing? And then it helps you refine, once again, that product experience. From a looks-like perspective, the automotive industry is notorious for a lot of looks-like prototypes. So this is the Acura NSX prototype. It's been floating around auto shows for the past 2 years. It looks gorgeous. There's no engine. There's no transmission. It literally, people push this thing in. There's an interior, but and that's why the windows are basically black, so you can't actually see in what's going on. But what it does is it allows us to understand, especially from such a design-heavy product like an automobile, how do you react to it? So much of buying a car is a kind of a guttural, visceral reaction. So what do you feel when you see this, right? So they can test the market without ever having to worry about the engineering of it. So there is value in this. But really what we're going to kind of focus on is the looks like, works like scenario. So this is a product actually by a company here in New York called Bonsai. It's a personal shaving device that just like a third of a cup of water allows you to shave, and it recycles the water, cleans out it disinfects your razor. So it's kind of designed for areas where there's not a whole lot of water, right? So this is the same materials that it'll be used for mass production. It's although it will be injection molded, they actually CNC'd it, sent it to model makers to really give it a 100% experience of what you would get if you bought it off the shelf, because that's the only way you can get really that full reaction from a potential customer. Now this, as time goes on, you refine your prototypes, you refine what you're trying to do, the experiences you want to elicit to your customers. And it's fairly linear, between just you internally, designers, investors, early adopters, and then kind of mass market. The issue is that the costs associated with that development are not linear, they're exponential. So once you get to the point where you're talking with manufacturers, you're getting kind of some of these testing units back, small changes cost a huge amount of time and money to implement. So oftentimes it's in these last 2 phases where we see products just kind of forget about taking a step back, doing a run of another 100 products, get into customers' hands to get reaction, because it's really, really expensive. But it's really imperative, and I'm going to talk through a few stories today of where that focusing on getting it back, getting the physical reaction to a product, whether it's a software or hardware, is critical. SwipeSense was started by 2 guys out of Northwestern University in Chicago who wanted to create a personal disinfectant device for medical professionals. Here's kind of some early drawings. It's basically, they apparently, and I can do this because my wife is a physician, so I kind of poke fun, it's an issue having physicians and nurses wash their hands all the time. Apparently it's not getting done as regularly as it should, so they thought if we can put a device on their person that allows them to do this, then we'll get higher compliance with these rules. And it actually is true. They found they've had really great response and increase of disinfectant hands as they see new patients. They got some great renderings together. They got a lot of money. They had pilots at 2 major hospitals for thousands of units, massive pilots. And they were humming along. They were starting to manufacture this product. And they went to a third hospital and they said, listen, I don't need 1,000, I just need 10. And I can tell you if we want more or not. So they said, sure, we'll make you 10. And one of the keys with this device was it's not battery powered. So it's kind of like, it's like a ballpoint pen. If you think about it, there's a reservoir, and as they roll their hand down it, we'll get to see it here. So this is kind of one of the first 10 that they built. They're already making 1,000 overseas, and they said, well, let's make 10 for this third customer. And you can see here's an early prototype. And they would just wipe their hands down it, and they'd be able to wash their hands together, and there they go. It wasn't battery powered. It used kind of pressure just in like a ballpoint pen. It was designed with administrative staff from these large hospitals and feedback from potential users. This is great. We don't have to worry about batteries. This is the perfect solution. 3 days into trials, they realized that not only were it's basically, this area here was getting covered with lint and all sorts of debris, and it looked terrible, and it was leaking because as they moved their hand down, it was just a completely wrong product for the world that they were living in. But it wasn't until they actually built one and put it in the field that they got this response. So now, and I wish I had another picture of more development, but now it looks much like this. You can see another one down here. It's basically like an automatic dispenser. You just put your hand under it, it dispenses it, it uses batteries, but it's the right solution to the problem. They wouldn't have known that had they not gone and done this extra physical layer of feedback before going to the product refinement. So when you're designing products and when you're going on, there's so many ideas, there's so many features, there's so many things you think you want to include, and they look great on paper, but it's not until you get it in front of people and have them start touching it, feeling it, where it really starts to make a difference. So OXO is a great example. They've sold like 50 million of these little peelers, right? So, and it was all, this took them 3 years to get from just a solid piece of wood to where they are today with it. And it was through thousands and thousands of different grips and sizes and lengths that they finally realized the one that was going to work best for consumers. And I think what's important is there was Fiskars, they make like scissors and different cutting devices. They wanted to come up with a new experience for a box cutter because oftentimes they're just kind of plain. And so what they did was instead of making 2 or 3 and kind of saying, here, which one do you like? They made 1 or 2 that looked like the real product. And then they made 60 handles that were made out of wood. And they said, you can't touch the ones that look like you. Can only touch the ones that are made out of wood, and tell me which ones you like and why you like them. And the reason they did that is that they knew that if they let you touch the one that looked like it, you were like, oh, I like this one. But if he was like, that's what it's going to look like, here are the 50 options you have for the look, for how it will feel, that's how they got the pure reaction to the best user experience possible. So once again, you don't actually have to go through the process of making 60 of a final product. You can make 1 or 2, and then where's the interaction happen, where you create and you do the 50 or 60 kind of iterations, whatever it might be. This also goes for application development. So I've talked a little bit about, a lot of physical. So this was actually early drawings for our application for our product. And this looks standard. Everybody's seen this if you're building any type of user interface. Some sort of wireframe, that's great. It got a little more refined. And then when we got to this point, this is something, Keenhome went through the Techstars Accelerator for the connected devices recently. And this was the biggest learning that I took away, was that we were here and we were ready to start having some people code this up so we could get some feedback. The problem was, we were iterating on this. And when I'm looking at this particular screen on a wireframe, I can see where I was and I can see where I'm going. But it completely changes if all you can see is this screen. The expectations of the user are much different. So literally, we printed out all of these screens and just glued them to a block of wood that was about the size of the phone, and just kind of you were able to flip through it. And we learned so much, probably 90% of what we would have learned had we gone through the exercise of coding it, taking the time and the energy to do that. We were able to do just by printing up this thing and throwing it on a block of wood and staples so we could flip through it as, assuming you were pushing certain buttons. So if there's anything anybody takes away is if you're building some sort of application experience, actually print it up in a similar form factor, because you're just going to learn so much and it's going to be so cheap to do that. Another example, this is another New York-based company called AdhereTech. This is a smart pill bottle. It's actually connected through a cellular network, so it will remind you that, hey, you've forgotten to take your medicine today. It's kind of intended for the elderly. And so, once again, they went through this really great experience where they were just using boxes and they were saying, what if the opening is only this large, or what if we orient it this way? And what if we actually was like a pill bottle with just kind of electronics and the necessary stuff next to it? And this simple exercise, and they were actually pretty far along before they went back to do this. They should have probably done it a little earlier, but luckily it came, they were able to get to the point where now they're doing the necessary 3D models and getting to the point where they can once again, because they were dealing with the elderly, they were thinking about themselves. Once they got into users' hands, the form factor changed a lot. Here's another example of, and I don't know if anybody's building anything that's kind of large, but so a smart conduit, and you'll see what the final looks like in a second, but it's just commercial cabling. It's very large, it doesn't bend very well, so oftentimes you have to put 90-degree angles on it. And so they made full-size models and gave it to contractors, and they said, here, what's working, what doesn't, because initially they had some great responses from smaller ones, but that didn't matter, or renderings. It was actually once they physically made it, here's cardboard, here's some works-like materials, and there's the final product. And they've basically reinvented how people are attaching cables to housing. It's amazing, but it was the physical putting it in front of contractors that elicited such a great response. And the last kind of example I have, I've never even heard of this, Takogo Aura Readers. Our design firm worked with them. They're clearly not doing so well from a product standpoint, but I think that has more to do with market dynamics than product design. But it's tough to see. There's kind of some nice subtle folds in there, but the reason I picked this and wanted to show this is because the inspiration from this came from folded paper. As opposed to doing renderings and asking a bunch of designers to put something together, it was literally folding paper and understanding which one felt the best to hold in the hand, which one looked the best, was how this company came to their final design. So something as early on as just looking at paper models can really affect the way that a product ends up in reality. So those are all the kind of examples that I wanted to walk through today, and I thought this would be a great point to you can start to ask me any questions, and I'd be happy to answer them. Is anybody building anything? A physical? One? What do you build?
It's technology-wise.
Yeah.
Just an app,
yeah. Yeah.
So prototyping and the flow charts, they're like, I see where I can relate to. From starting from sketches, and then kind of building it up in Photoshop.
Yeah, you'll be surprised how much reaction you can, or how much you can learn from just printing it up. It's pretty remarkable. So go ahead.
So where do you see the line between like too much usability studies, because that obviously costs a lot of money and not enough. Like, what's that fine line between?
That's a great question. So we're actually at the point right now where we have about 100 units coming back from China, made out of the right materials, the right electronics. But the process, it's not injection molded, it's being CNC'd, and I know that's a lot of jargon, but it's costing us 10 times as much to make these 100 units as it will cost us to make regular units. But we're doing this because we need to get that feedback. There's a point where you're going through it too much, but I think it's safe to say that you design something and you try to take as much information as you can, but it's not until you get in front of someone that you actually learn a lot. You need to at least do that twice, because there's going to be so many changes that first time around that you're going to want that second level of refinement before you really start to push it out. But a lot of times, it's not about getting it in front of, especially for some applications, it is software pieces. We actually have just 5 people who kind of very diverse, but those are the 5 people we go to with basically all of our kind of testing criteria. And it was Frog Design who, we thought, oh, we need to get this in front of thousands of people. They said, you're just going to get so much chaos and noise. You find 5 people who are kind of your target market, but not necessarily completely your target market, a little bit of fringe, and they're going to give you 90% of the feedback you need, and then you can get the last 10% through surveys or kind of larger, easy, cheap customer feedback surveys. So that's what I found, and I think that's probably much more hardware-centric. It's a lot easier to iterate, and we've done it a lot on our application, our user experience, but kind of fulsome, full-sale reviews, probably you don't need to do more than 2, because it just becomes, at some point you need to get a product out there, right? It's not about just thinking about a product, we actually need to start selling it, so. It seems.
My question isn't fully thought out, but how do you, specifically if you're designing for physical and people are kind of used to how their physical stuff works, or they're used to how a garbage can works, or they're used to, whatever. How do you kind of not only build the product that people need, but kind of help them change the behavior to use that new product?
Yeah. So that's something that we've kind of been going through. Homeowners don't think about their vents. They don't interact with their vents, and so we didn't want to build a product that required you to interact with it for it to work. So we've really designed it to be seamless and automated. It learns your habits based upon the sensors in the device, as well as just the few inputs you may ever, oh, I'm too hot right now. Okay, great, we'll work on that. But that being said, we do want to let people know that we're something special, that there's, and we call, we often internally, we just call them like, what kind of delighters can we put into a product experience? And so some of them are, and you can go, I didn't actually bring any kind of looks like and what we're working on, but even just the faceplate designs are much different than what you currently see in the market, something to remind you as you walk by that something is happening there. We've also installed some really interesting lighting so that when the product is actively working, it just might put on a soft glow blue for 3 seconds or a few pulses, just once again, to remind you that something is happening, something is changing, but we're not asking you to actively participate in it. So there's trying to change consumer behavior is a huge uphill battle, but I think it's what you want to do is to take those incremental steps with them, educate them, and then allow them to opt in to kind of the evolution of that experience. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's go. We found a transponder app where consider us like Uber for emergency service response. We created a problem just instead of having a customer calls, there's very expensive. The most non-sustainable thing you could do now in 2015, pick up the phone and call. So we're using that Uber model. Mm-hmm. So actually, in order for our app to function and do everything that we're promising, we have to partner up with emergency response and utilities, which is going to be a lot of footwork that are being ongoing in the next few months. So with that said, will you caution me against using the satisfaction that a user gets from interacting with Uber? They're doing essentially the same. Instead of calling a taxi, they're using the Uber app. So I'm using that matrix, that experience, to make the case as to why this system is more sustainable, functional. Do you see anything that?
Yeah, and without knowing the complete picture, the question I would ask you is for those, whoever you're talking to, whether it's partners, investors, customers, what is the pain point that your solution solves for them? For them, if it's convenience and comfort or whatever, or it's that kind of the Uber ability of it, then that's a good sell. If for them it's this increases your efficiency, it keeps trucks moving more rapidly or more consistently, so that means more money for you. For a consumer, certainly that convenience is the way to approach it. It may be that for the dispatchers as well, it may not be. So the story doesn't have to be the same, and in fact, it probably should be different depending on who you're talking to. When we're talking with Lowe's, it's a different message than when we're talking with prospective customers, than we're talking with investors, right? It's not completely different, but what we hit on, because it's the pain points or the things they get excited about are a little bit different. Go ahead.
Just a question about lessons learned. So you've gone through this process. What would you advise us to try to stay away from?
Yeah, I would say, although I talked a lot about refinements and trying to get everything right, that should always be with the mind of what's the minimum viable product that I need to get out there that fulfills the vision that I have for the problem I'm trying to solve, but it doesn't have to be all the bells and whistles in the world. For our product, for example, we're doing lots of creative things around presence detection. You have airflow flowing through the ducts. We're actually going to use a generator to make it indefinite battery life. None of that is going to be in the first version of the product because that's not critical to getting to exit for our vision, but it helps with other things that we can do. So I would say don't get mired down in what the ultimate goal is. Figure out what the minimum viable product is and work towards that. And if they happen to be one and the same, that's fine. But just make sure that your team knows what is the minimum product you need to be able to bring to market. And fundraising takes a lot longer than you think it should. That would be the other lesson. And there was somebody talking about funding just right before, right? Yeah, it takes a long time. Okay, great.